Protests have been raging across France as part of an uprising against police brutality. This latest demonstration comes on the heels of the June 27th police killing of 17-year-old Nahel M, a descendant of Algeria. However, a recent article in Jacobin contends the French riots are a result of miserable conditions in France.
Here to tell us more about her reporting in Jacobin and what's happening on the ground in France is doctorate student and researcher Marion Beauvalet. Marion, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So tell us what, in your impression, is actually going on right now. Obviously, we have a very mixed picture in the U.S. I think it's not clear and is not being reported on by U.S. media outlets with a lot of clarity. So what do you think is the real story?
So a few days ago, a young teenager, he was 17, was shot down by a policeman. He was driving a car in order to bring his little brother to an exam, and he didn't have the right to drive a car. And when the policeman told him that he wanted to control the car, there was an increase of violence, and so the video shows that the policeman put his gun on the head of the young man, and he told him that he would shoot if so Nahel didn't respond clearly to the police, and the young boy, so he panicked, and he tried to drive, and then the policeman shot in his head, and the young man died, and he was with two other people in the car who saw the scene, and so the police was also filmed by the young people. And then so there was a video, and then there was the increase of anger in the population, and many demonstration on evening and mobilization.
So there's a lot of parallels here to some of the incidents of police violence that we've talked about recently in the United States, the fact that it was caught on video, this kind of dueling perceptions of what happened here. People who are sympathetic to the 17-year-old that was killed say that this was a disproportionate use of force, a disproportionate use of threat, and that was perhaps racially motivated. The individual was of Algerian descent. Other people, and the police officer has averred that he needed to, he was afraid that the kid would drive the car and hurt people with the vehicle, and that was the threat that required him to shoot and kill him. But what is different from, I think, what we have been understanding in the context of, say, the Black Lives Matter movement is the role that French cultural identity versus racial identity is understood differently in the country, and how this is playing out as there's this division among North African, largely French citizens in terms of how they've been treated in the country, and whether that discussion of different treatment has really seen as much prevalence as we've had it in America. Can you unpack that a little bit? What's going on here from a kind of an ethnic, racial, cultural perspective?
Okay. So first, I would like to give a little of the political context. 2 years ago, the government, so Emmanuel Macron, he had the majority at the parliament. He wanted to pass a bill saying that we couldn't film the policemen anymore. It means that if you are attacked, if you are hurt by the police, you couldn't prove it because you couldn't film the police. And there was a huge mobilization, and now we can still film the police thanks to the mobilization of associations, political parties, etc. But there is always a desire for the government to endorse the position of the police rather than the population. And there was a second bill we forgot a little bit in France. It was passed in 2017 by the Socialist Party when they were, so before Emmanuel Macron. It was a bill who said that in case of danger suspected by the police, they could use their gun, and it was voted by the parliament at that period. And since this bill was adopted, there is a huge increase of use of gun by the police, and also we see that more and more people are dying when there is a police intervention. And as you said before, there is a question of systemic racism first in the population and also in the police, because the police is not disconnected from the population. And we also see with their union and corporatist movement that many people in the French police are part of a right-wing and a radical right-wing movement. And so there is a problem of racism in the police, and there is a problem of the government with always endorsing the proposition of the police.
Well, French President Emmanuel Macron is being scrutinized for threatening to suspend social media networks in an effort to crack down on the spread of violence and the unrest. How is this being received? He said, I'm looking at The Guardian, he said we need to think about how young people use social networks, and when things get out of hand, we may have to regulate them or cut them off. How has that been received by the people of France?
It seems totally absurd because there is a question, according to Emmanuel Macron, the problem is linked to the parents, how the parents are going with their children. There is also the problem, he says that one of the roots of the violence is about video games. There is no study saying that video games are creating violence in the population. It was never demonstrated, but to say that, and he also said that there were problems with social media, especially Snapchat and also TikTok and also Twitter. But it's not the roots of the problem we have. We have a problem for the population of public services, of systemic discrimination and racism, and the government want to cut in some circumstances social networks for some people. It seems totally absurd and stupid and also very authoritarian.
Yeah, we've been from across the pond looking at the various protests in France over labor issues, the lack of garbage pickup, the protesting the move to raise the retirement age. And here on the left, some of us look at it kind of enviously because it takes quite a bit to get Americans on the street, whereas culturally in France, it seems like there's much more of an appetite for protest and civil disobedience in service of what people believe to be basic foundational rights. And I wonder that whether how this protest movement is being received, if there's still more sympathy for it, you think, in France than maybe the more disruptive or violent Black Lives Matter movements here were received over time. Are people largely supportive of them, or because of the nature of this protest being about police brutality as opposed to economic rights, are we seeing more frustration in France?
I think there was a kind of there is an evolution years after years, and about the police brutality. I think there was a rupture during the movement against the retirement bill, because many people who went in the streets, it was kind of I don't know, teacher, some people who never have problem with police, and they saw violence. And so we are in this context of many people who don't have to face police violence. They saw it during the last months and they didn't understand why, and they say, okay, maybe there is a problem with police. And now we have this situation. I think that more and more people are aware of this problem, this systemic problem, and the necessity to reform the police. And there is also on the political spectrum, on the left wing, I think the political party are more and more aware of this question of racism in the society and also in the police. And I think that there is people are shocked by what's happening today.
Yeah, that's fascinating, the idea that their experience with labor militancy has given people more sympathy with people who are protesting police violence more specifically. Thank you so much, Marion, for joining us today.
Thank you.